Hello and welcome to the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. If you moved abroad following your significant other and are looking to create a fulfilled life on your terms there, this is the place to be. I'm your host, Camilla Quintana, and I'm so excited to be on this journey with you and to inspire you to create the kind of life abroad you truly deserve. Hello, ladies. Hello, moms, especially expectant moms. Welcome back to the Empowered Expat Wife podcast. Today, we have such an exciting topic that I did not think that we would ever have such a topic on. And I did not know that you, Karen, existed. And I'm so thrilled that I found you. We're going to talk about having a baby abroad with a real expert. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited. So let me just quickly introduce you. Karen Wilmot is an expat midwife. How cool is that? And she's been supporting families around the globe for over a decade, in person and online, as the virtual midwife. Her book, Giving Birth Abroad, The Essential Guide for Expats Expecting, is available on Amazon and provides the roadmap to really embrace pregnancy as part of this expat adventure. It's packed with checklists and cheat sheets, coupled with practical wisdom of 20 years of experience abroad. Karen has worked on a diamond mine in South Africa, in a small village in Mexico, in a military hospital in Saudi Arabia, and with the royal family of Oman. And this rich diversity of experience has given her deep insight into the needs of women across countries and cultures, as well as the unique challenges that expats face. And this is exactly what we're going to tackle today. So thank you again for being here, Karen.
Thank you so much. It's always so funny when you hear somebody else reading your bio. And I have to admit, I never tire of hearing it. It really feels great.
When
I have a deep sense of pride and joy hearing it. So thank you.
Yes, I can imagine, and you should have that deep sense of joy and pride. When I first heard about you, I had no idea that such a thing as a virtual midwife existed. I was like, oh my God, I need her to come on my podcast. And if I remember correctly, I hadn't even launched my podcast at the time. But I was like, I sent you an email. I was like, this is so brilliant. I want to have an interview with you. And it comes at such a great time because just 3 months ago, I gave birth to my baby boy abroad. So even though he's the third boy, but he's the first one to be born abroad. It just so happened that, the first one was due in the summer vacation, so I could go back home and do everything there with my doctor and everything with my mom there. That was really nice. And when the second boy was born, we were spending a few years back home in my home country, Austria. So this one was the first baby to be born abroad in Spain in the middle of the pandemic, but it turned out okay. And
so you had a real double whammy.
Yes, it was. But it went all fine. Thank goodness. So yes, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, about what you do. We'll love to hear that.
Well, I think it's also, it's important for me to say that I never set out to become the virtual midwife. I never set out to do this. I think like all good things, it evolved organically through deep need. And that always reassures me that I know that I'm on the right path. And it evolved out of me working with expats. I was living in the Middle East at the time and just realizing the different needs. One of my fondest memories of how it all started and where the seed was planted was on one of my days off, lying around the pool. And as expats, we all tend to congregate, and there's certain places where you go and hang out. And I was at one of those places, and there were a group of women who'd had their babies, and I'd been present at their birth because, once again, as an expat in a small place, most people have their babies at one of 2 or 3 hospitals, and at that stage there was only one private hospital in Muscat, so all the expats would come there to have their babies. And every time I got in the pool, I could sort of see them sitting up and looking around and whispering amongst each other, and some were breastfeeding and some were pushing prams and everything. And then eventually I got out the pool, and one tentatively came over and she said, oh, can I ask you something about breastfeeding? And another one said, would you mind coming to the bathroom with me and just checking my wound? And I ended up spending the next 3 hours doing sort of like back-to-back consultations. And my friend jokingly said, you should really charge for these. I said, no, I couldn't possibly do that. But the seed was planted, and through that, I realized what a great need there was, that there really wasn't anywhere for these expat moms to go to get advice beyond the hospital, which wasn't always geared up to give them the advice that they were seeking. So
Yes.
that was where it kind of started, but then it grew, and then it just grew. And many of those families were moved to other countries, as happens with expats. We move after a few years, and then because we already had a deep relationship of trust and understanding, I would be the person they would reach out to.
I
Once you
love
go
that.
online, then borders really don't exist
No,
anymore.
they
It's
don't.
it's all
And
about relationship.
yes, and even more of that, and I noticed that as an expat coach as well, there can be some resistance, and understandably, to a local. So maybe the local midwife, there can be some resistance because she's used to doing things differently. She doesn't have the same understanding of your culture. So I think actually for expats, it is very comforting to know that there aren't only locals available for them to be their midwife, to coach them, to whatever it is. They can have a person of their trust who has a better understanding of this very particular lifestyle that we're leading, right?
And
Um,
I would also say that that resistance is both ways. There's a resistance that comes from the expats of the local care that is available, and there's a resistance from the locals to the expats who, because they feel that the expectations are so different
yeah,
to the locals.
I
So
agree.
it's just that cultural misunderstanding, not necessarily wrong or right. It's just a cultural difference that we have to deal with.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. And so having a baby abroad can be really scary. And I imagine if it's your first, even more so. I mean, I'm really glad that I got to have my first, surrounded by my family and so forth. That was really very comforting to me. So for all those women right now who are expecting, whether it's their first or their fifth child, in addition to that, we are in the middle of a pandemic and things are different. Can you say some words of comfort to them, or yes, some uplifting words that you can share with them?
Um, yes, absolutely. Because I think at the core of your pregnancy care is always coming back to the fact that this is a miracle. It's one of the most beautiful experiences of your life. And not to allow your pregnancy and the joy and adventure that comes with that to be changed or marred by your circumstances, because they are essentially circumstances, and they're not, I think our initial thought in the beginning is that because it's different and we don't understand it, and there are those cultural differences and that sense of resistance, that it almost translates to it's not going to be good enough, or it's not going to be what it would be at home. And we really don't know that to be true. We absolutely don't know that to be true, because everything we do in life is what we make of it. And your pregnancy will not be any different because of the country that you're in when you fall pregnant, and when you change throughout your pregnancy. It it's happening in your body, so you have more control over that than what you think. The environmental factors are literally that, they're environmental factors. And to separate those environmental factors from your body and your pregnancy and what's actually happening, and also to separate them from the pandemic, to try, ultimately they're all going to come together and create a big picture and the overall experience, but they need to be dealt with differently. And
Mm,
the starting point must be one of joy, and of moving into a place of deep trust that actually I felt pregnant through love. And I've already been pregnant for a couple of weeks when I found out that I'm pregnant, and nothing was different, even though I'm in a far corner of deepest, darkest, wherever you are, or, regardless, I'm still pregnant. And this miracle is occurring right now within my body. And, the next stage, of course, the moment you find out you're pregnant, is seeking out the best possible care to make sure that your pregnancy progresses well. And once again, that's very standard, regardless of where you are. There are certain scans that we need to have, there are certain blood tests that you need to have. And visits with your care provider, and your visits to your care provider are to rule out risk factors as well as those blood tests and scans. So, and it's a dynamic. Pregnancy is dynamic. It's changing every single day, and you cannot be sitting in your doctor's room every single day. So, the most important thing is to learn to really tune into your body and trust all those different changes, because with pregnancy, you feel physically different. You've got little aches and pains, there's spotting, there's nausea, there's heartburn, there's all of these symptoms that when we're not pregnant very often indicate something is wrong. And yet when you're pregnant, they are reminding you that your body is changing and this is a response to that, and it's all okay. But you kind of need someone to reassure you, and you need them there a lot of the time, not just 10 times, which is usually the amount of times that you would get to see your doctor in pregnancy.
I so agree. I could not agree more. Just having someone who, especially someone who really knows, right? You can have a friend or you can have your mom, but they're not professionals. They can give you good advice, but they're not professionals. So that to me would have been priceless, to have someone that you can just check in, because especially with this last pregnancy, I had some, in the end, there were minor complications, but still, every complication can be really scary at the time that you're going through that. And what you really want is someone to kind of hold your hand every day and for you to be able to ask every little question. So that to me is absolutely priceless. And also, I just love, I felt so comforted, even though I'm not in this position anymore, but just listening to your uplifting words that this is a miracle, and always coming back to this notion that it is a miracle and you need to enjoy this miracle and it's all going to work out. I gave birth having to wear a mask. That was actually the most scary part for me. I was like, how in the world am I going to do that? And you know what? I didn't even notice. So sometimes I think we can get really scared and anxious about things that then in the end, they will not even matter.
It's where you choose to put your focus. And the woman I work with, that's what we work with, is what are we focusing on here? And let's always come back to the joy. And as you say, that having the support of someone that you trust and someone who is a professional really does make the difference. I mean, that's how I tend to work with most of my clients, is that they do have a hotline, a 24/7 hotline to me. And while they don't use it that often, when they do, I know it is the difference between, I mean, sometimes it's something simple, but maybe going to the doctor and getting a positive group B strep result, or waking up and they've got a cold. What do they do? Is it going to impact the pregnancy? Can they take a Panadol? They want those answers immediately.
Mhm.
And I have their pregnancy history. I know them. They're not coming in cold and saying, can I take this? I've been working with them for months. So I know everything, and I know, their beliefs as well. So I can guide them accordingly.
Oh,
It just makes a big, big, big difference. And, when there's a sense of trust, it changes everything,
oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Oh,
everything.
this is so beautiful what you do. I'm so glad, that you exist for the expat community. I love it. So you've worked with so many women around the globe. Now, what would you say are the most common challenges when it comes to giving birth abroad? What is your experience?
I think initially when finding out that you're pregnant and you're abroad, it's the shock of being separated or far from your family and friends and your close circle. So that's one hurdle that's is I mean, it's not a big hurdle, but it's one that is initially, oh, I want to go back. It's the first thought is, I want to go back. I want to be with my people. When you realize, actually, no, this is part of our adventure and everything, the next thing is, okay, well, I am here. Who am I going to find that I trust and who will give me the best care? Because obviously we want the best care. And then that's when the online searches start. And that's when you start chatting to other expats and hearing all the horror stories and reading things online. And that just sends you into an absolute state of anxiety and fear, which is counterproductive. The big thing then is always coming back to yourself, but then finding a care provider and knowing what has to happen at what stage of your pregnancy. I have what I call a pregnancy timeline, and I'll happily share that with you, and you can sort of have it as a download. I'm not sure
Oh
how
yes,
that
I will
works.
share that in my session notes, definitely.
Yeah, sure. So I will share that pregnancy timeline, which is just a, you just look at it and you say, okay, right, I'm 5 weeks pregnant now. Um, this is what I need to have at 10 weeks. I need to have my antenatal blood screening and the NT scan. What is an NT scan? What information will I get from that? Is that available? And then looking around where you're at. Am I going to go to private healthcare? I'm going to government healthcare. What are those two like? As an expat, am I entitled to government healthcare? Finding a care provider who you feel comfortable with, and where there's not, especially if you're in a country where your language is not the language of the country,
Oh, that's a big.
knowing how you can find a care provider where things are not going to get lost in translation, because I've seen that happen as well so often. Um, just in a simple conversation, you're so desperate to hear what you want to hear that you miss what's actually been said.
Yes. Yes, and sometimes also I think you don't feel heard and understood by the doctor. I know that happened to me a couple of times, and maybe you're not able to express yourself so well, or maybe you're just too tensed and too nervous, and already expecting that this foreign doctor will not entirely get what you're, where you're coming from. So I think that makes the communication even more difficult then.
Yes, and that's exactly what it is. You go in with an expectation that the doctor won't understand you. So, actually, one of the things that I encourage expats to do is, that's why I share the timeline. Be very clear about what it is that is needed, and to learn to work on your communication skills. Don't expect it to come from the care provider in that country, because once, as expats, we know we are guests there. So we have to work a little bit harder to find the care and get the answers that we need. And when you're pregnant, you don't actually know what questions to ask. Um, so once again, having someone who can say, right, at this visit, this is what's going to happen. These are the questions you want to think about. Although there is a timeline, countries do differ, and some countries won't do a NT scan as a matter of routine. They will just do an anomaly scan. Some don't even do that.
Mhm.
So deciding what it is that you want, why you want it, what actually happens in those tests, what results will you be getting, and deciding for you whether that is something that you want. And something that I've seen happen sometimes as well is that more tests would be available than what would have been in their home country. So you want someone to be able to bounce that back and forth with and start making decisions, because this is part of your pregnancy journey. You
Yeah.
need to take responsibility for your health and well-being, and understand why these tests and investigations are being done, and what results you will get for them, and what you're going to do with those results as well.
And I think, like you said, always remember you have much more control than you might feel that you do. The pregnancy
Absolutely.
is happening in your body. You already mentioned that before. And you can really go into a doctor's appointment very prepared. Look up the vocabulary beforehand if you need to, write out the questions. You have more control that you might think you do.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And even taking if you have local friends, taking a local friend along who would be able to translate if needed, or realizing that when you're faced with a decision to be made, 99% of the time you don't need to make that decision on the spot. You have time to go back and do some research, or seek a second opinion, or ask other people for more information before you make a decision. And
Mhm.
I also teach the ladies and the couples that I work with a little way of communicating. It's called brats, and basically, if they're offered something that they don't understand, first of all, finding out what it is. What is it that you're offering me, and then are there any benefits that would, for me and for my baby? What are the risks associated with that? Are there any alternatives? And do I need to do it? Is this is this the only thing that is available to me? Are there any other ways of doing it? And what's the timing? I mean, are you suggesting that I do this or have this injection or whatever immediately? Or could I wait a few days, or next week, or next month, or never? There's always, always a way around it. And you
I love that.
99% of the time you have time to have that discussion and really make informed decisions, because at the end of the day it's about making an informed decision.
Yes, that's great. That's so helpful. BRAT. So benefits, risks,
Risks,
alternatives.
alternatives, and timing.
Excellent. That's something that I think we can all now keep, for any medical issue that we may encounter abroad. That's a great thing to go through in our mind before going to the doctors.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. And I was just thinking while you were talking that sometimes we tend to check in with our friends back home, for instance, for those of us who actually have this home base, or maybe it's a previous country where you felt extremely well and safe. But I think sometimes it's really important to take a leap of faith and also trust in this different medical system that you have in your current host country. It's not necessarily worse just because it's different. That's what I found. Yes, many things were very different. It was a bit scary. But as I kind of started to embrace it more, I realized, hey, actually, I like these aspects about it.
Well, also, what makes for a good birth experience? I've had women who have been in the top, not hotels, the best hospitals in the world with the best obstetricians and the best healthcare team that money can buy, and had a terrible birth experience because they were unprepared, and they handed over their birth experience to the best hospital, the best obstetrician, and the best team, thinking that because they were paying a lot of money and they had the best, it would be great. But as you know, your birth experience is you're experiencing it. You could be sitting in a 5-star hospital, or you could be sitting in the forest, but it doesn't
Right.
change what you're experiencing. And the only thing that matters when you're in labor and when you're experiencing this incredibly intense time of your life, and I'm speaking specifically of giving birth here and the birth process, is that you are surrounded by or have with you somebody that you love and trust. That is ultimately the most important thing, that you feel safe, that you feel safe, that you know what's happening, that you're not stuck in a place of fear and unknown.
And you talked about expectations. So let's talk a little more about that, because I think they're often at the root of disappointments that can occur. So what would you say are some realistic expectations to have when it comes to giving birth abroad?
Wow. So once again, I'm going to go back to what I teach and what I do with the clients that I work with. And that is, the whole pregnancy is about preparation and learning and understanding, and really having a deep understanding of the physiology of pregnancy and of birth, and of the many variables that that holds. Because there isn't only, while we know that there are, I mean, your baby can either be born vaginally or can be born surgically. Those are the two options, but there are many other variables to that. Many, many, many. So when someone is fully prepared and has that deep understanding, then I encourage them to let go of expectations, because they've put everything in place. So they are now only they've prepared their space and their environments, and they understand their environments, and they've prepared their team that they feel safe with. They found a care provider that they feel comfortable with, and they are deeply understanding of what to expect in terms of going into labor, what it's going to feel like, and they have the tools and the techniques to cope with it. And then they let go of expectations of how long it's going to take, of what it might feel like. Um, but they do know that it's going to be intense, and it's going to be transformative and unexpected. But it's about letting go. And once again, it comes back to trust. I know I sound like a stuck record, but it really does come back to that. And it's amazing because that trust can be developed quite quickly. For some reason, in the last couple of months, and it's all been sort of word of mouth, a lot of the people who I work with come to me from a referral from somebody else. And a few months ago, I helped somebody who only reached out to me when she was 38 weeks, an expat, and had a previous, not traumatic, but what during her labor, she'd really struggled in the spaces between to be able to relax, and she didn't want that to happen again. And I worked with her for 2 weeks, and she had a beautiful birth experience. And somehow over the last couple of months, I've just had this rush of women who are 38 plus weeks who've been reaching out to me. And then I've had an amazing opportunity to work with them literally for the time that they reach out at roughly 38 weeks until the time that they go into labor. But in that time, we're able to develop a relationship of trust and deep knowing. And even when they're in labor, they're reaching out. And at that stage, it's easy for me to say, right, now's the time to let go. You know, we already know that things have changed a little bit. This isn't what you expected, but you've got the tools, you've got the techniques, you know that you can do this. And then a couple of hours later, I get a picture of her sitting holding her baby, and I'm like, yay.
Yes. And in that moment, I mean, it's all forgotten. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think birth is just unexpected, but the preparation is essential. You know, nothing can really prepare you for what you're going to experience, but without it, it's too overwhelming. There are too many variables. And yeah. And then
True.
I think we go in with the incorrect expectations.
Yes, and there are many variables, but there's also this information overload that back in the day, let me just say, we did not, women did not have. And I think that's actually what's making many women so conscious and so anxious often about their pregnancy, because I mean, they can just Google whatever condition it is that they're experiencing and find horrific possibilities for what might be going on. So like you said, it's so important, I think, not to put your trust in the information out there in the internet, for instance, but rather put it in, for instance, a midwife or your doctor, or in your own body, which I think has a lot to do also with practicing self-care, which is what I speak a lot about, in order to be able to develop this trust in yourself and in your own body, and feeling like you are actually in a safe space that is yourself, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yes, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more about the information overload. I see it as such a double-edged sword, because without the internet, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. But I know that very often when somebody reaches out to me, they're reaching out because of something that they've read online, that they've been experiencing low abdominal pain and have Googled it. And
Yeah. And then you know what else? So I had a hematoma in my third pregnancy, which was really a horrible moment, I must say, because I was like 4 months plus pregnant, and I had a miscarriage before that one. Other than that, I had very good pregnancy, so I really can't complain. And this moment, getting up at night and seeing just blood everywhere, and I was like, this cannot be happening again. It was the middle of the lockdown, a very strict lockdown here in Spain, so I had to go to the hospital by myself. I wasn't even able to take my husband or anyone. Also, he had to stay with the kids because it was in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it turned out to be a hematoma. That's how you say it in English too, right?
yeah, so it's a what we call a retroplacental bleed.
Exactly.
So
It
a
was
little bleed behind the placenta, and some of it comes away, but then it
exactly.
forms a blood clot.
Hmm. And my doctor, he was pretty relaxed about it, to be honest. He said it wasn't of a big size and not to worry. Okay, so then obviously I went on the internet. I spoke to some friends who had something similar, but listen, guys, your friends do not have the same thing that you have. Just because one woman goes through something, it doesn't mean that this is going to happen to you. And then I was like, this might be much worse than I'm thinking. Is my doctor maybe lying to me? And he said not to worry about it. So I was really confused. In the end, it turned out to be just what my doctor had said. But I think we can cause ourselves to get very stressed over not nothing. It is something, but it's not necessary to go through that stress. And that, just to go back to that point, it happens from information overload from the internet, from our friends that are different. They have different pregnancies, they have different bodies. Yes, trust.
Yeah. And it's so individual. Every single pregnancy. I mean, you've had 3 babies. Was there anything similar in each of the pregnancies and each of the births?
Yeah, I guess not. Me, I was.
You
I
were.
was always there. Very, very present.
But the pregnancies were completely different and the births were different.
Yes, true, true.
Yeah.
And so another thing that I really wanted to ask you, because I think that's something that we are all experiencing, all expat moms and expectant expat moms. It's when the cultures and the habits of your host country are so different to the one of your home country. And there is this clash, right? So what would you recommend mothers to do to honor their own customs and expectations that they have because they've seen their friends and their mom and their aunts maybe have a certain type of labor, a certain type of, a lot of times lactation is also an issue that's handled very differently in different countries, but then to still be fine where they are.
I would definitely encourage moms to learn about the country's cultures and customs, because very often they once again go in with a jaded or prejudiced view of what it is, and immediately or whatever, but possibly assume that the cultures and customs are too different and not okay. They don't, because they're not aligned with what we know and our values. But when you learn about them and you know the history behind them, because that's how customs arise, is that there's a deep history around them. Sometimes you might find that actually that would be a beautiful thing to incorporate into your experience. And if it's not, that's okay. You understand it, and you can say, what, that's beautiful for them, but it doesn't work for me. But then what are my customs? What is it that I want? And how am I going to make this possible where I am? Because it's always possible to bring what you need and what you want to where you are, always. It's just about finding the right resources and believing it enough and making it happen.
I love
But,
that you're saying that. And I could not agree more. And if I may share a quick example of my own life, and it's so funny because I noticed myself like totally opening up to you and telling you all my pregnancy stories. So I can just attest, and I did not know Karen in person, well, virtually in person before that, but she is extremely trustworthy and it's extremely comfortable to open up to you. So I can just
thank you.
confirm that here. So one thing, for instance, that happened to me in Austria, a natural, I think it's a very natural birth and lactation process is definitely desired by almost everyone I know, at least. Breastfeeding is very important, great importance on that. And I lived in Spain with two of my pregnancies at least, and it just so turned out that breastfeeding was a horror for me. It was extremely painful. I didn't have enough milk. The babies wouldn't gain weight. Then I had to give them a bottle. Then I had to first breastfeed, then give them a bottle, which is such a hassle. So it was actually a very, very unpleasant experience. So in Spain, breastfeeding, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but there's definitely a large proportion of women apparently that don't even breastfeed at all. And at first I found myself quite critical, like we can sometimes be when we don't know better. And I said, well, I just don't agree with this, and I definitely don't want this for myself. In the end, I must say, this just my own experience of not really being able to breastfeed so well and then turning to the bottle quite quickly, I think being here in Spain made this so much easier for me, where I did not have this expectation from anyone to be able to breastfeed. In fact, they said, wow, you breastfed for 2 months. That's incredible. While back home, it was like, what, 2 months? I didn't even really mention. I guess I'm mentioning now. So just to say, that sometimes, yes, the traditions of your host country, they might be different, but hey, maybe they work for you, or maybe they're not so bad at all. Maybe they're even better for you. It's a great way to kind of take a step back and evaluate what is it that really goes with you as a person, because we're, in the end, we are indoctrinated also by our home countries. It's not like it's the best way. It's just what we're conditioned to believe is best.
Absolutely. And you have a perfect opportunity to examine that and say, actually, is this what I want? And I have a similar story actually because I spent so much time in the Middle East. And one of the beautiful traditions that they have is that mostly, and it's surprising that it's changing now actually as with the modernization, but traditionally, moms would go after birth, go and spend time with their mother. So they would move into their parents' home for 40 days, which is 6 weeks. And during that time, mom would pamper them and all the aunties would be around. And it's all about just celebration of this new baby and the new family. And dads are certainly welcome in that space, but it's very much a woman centered space. And
Mm,
I just love that because I think
me
birth is
too.
all about women and the sisterhood and the motherhood um, and I used to just love sitting around in those circles and listening to all the stories. And it was one of the things that I encouraged the expat moms that I worked with. I said, you don't have your mother, but you have 6 weeks that you can, or your mother can come here for 6 weeks. But just think about that 6 week period as this transition time, as the fourth trimester where we work with. And you take this and use it as an amazing opportunity
Mm, yeah.
for healing and transformation and settling into this new change.
Yeah, I don't know what your opinion is about that because you know so many different cultures, but I feel like in let me call it the Western world, we rush it a little bit. I mean,
Oh,
I got
absolutely.
sent home after 2 days in the hospital, and honestly, it was too early. I mean, I didn't feel very fit. I had two other kids at home. I would have loved to stay for longer, but they basically like kicked me out. And then I met a Chinese mom at the bus stop for, from school. And she said, in China, for 40 days, the woman is just really staying home and being pampered by everyone. And I was like, oh, I wish I were in China right now.
Beautiful. And that's actually one of the things that's come out of COVID is realizing how moms are thriving because they don't have that influx of visitors and people surrounding them in those first few weeks. Um, that they are able to have that time for bonding, and even the breastfeeding rates have been better because of it. Obviously, that's in places where there's support for breastfeeding because um, really very often when breastfeeding is challenging, it's because the right support isn't around. There isn't somebody who can come in and make those little tweaks and changes and say, well, let's try this, let's do that.
Yeah.
And it's very, very easy, once you get to that point where your nipples are cracked and your breasts are engorged and you can't stop crying, to just say, oh, no, thanks, this is not for me.
Yeah, it is. I
So,
know. Yeah.
exactly.
But I absolutely agree, not having any visitors. And I mean, as expats, we have so few people anyway. We don't have our family around. We may not have so many friends. It actually turned out to be really helpful for me. Because I could
Mm.
just, the schedule with a baby is completely different. You're on his or her schedule all the time. So not having to look at the watch and say, oh, I'm expecting auntie so and so now, and I still have to maybe prepare something for her because she's coming over. Oh, it's actually been really helpful. So even though if you're listening to this, it can feel so lonely to have a baby abroad and not be surrounded by your loved ones, but it could also have an upside, which is that you are just fully there, present for and with the baby.
And I think what you've said really is so important because it is about opening your mind to the opportunities that exist already because of your situation. Our immediate thought is to think of all the opportunities we've missed, but there are so many that you don't even know are there because you are in a foreign country. And that just enriches your experience so much. And I also believe that because you're in a strange country, you are almost driven and possibly even forced, but I don't like that word. It's a little bit too strong, but certainly you're guided to seek out more help and more support and more information. And that in itself enriches your experience because you're taking charge, you're taking responsibility.
Yeah.
And very often, if you're in your comfort zone, you just think, oh well, I've got the best doctor and this is okay, and all my friends went to that doctor and everything was fine, and then go into it and wow, that wasn't so great after all. I wish I'd known about that. Nobody told me about this. And then you move into the blame culture. So the blame culture is less when the more informed you are.
Yes, I agree. The more in control you feel and the
Yeah.
more you trust. We've mentioned this a few times, but I just want to go back to it because I think it's really the best advice that we can give new mothers, expectant mothers on their journey. So, Karen, this has been so great. Absolutely right. I'm so happy to have talked to you. And now, can you let us know how could people get in touch with you, find out more about you, and then also start working with you? What's the process like?
All the information is on my website, which is thevirtualmidwife.com. It's really, really easy. If you search that, you'll see all about me, my story. Although I am an expat midwife, at the moment, I'm not an expat. I'm actually back in my home country of Cape Town, South Africa. But we do have the benefits of the internet. So I have clients around the world. And I have courses, but my preferred way of working with couples, especially expats, is that I work one-on-one throughout your pregnancy. And we have that 24/7 availability, which means that you do get access to all my courses. But rather than you going off and doing them on your own, we work through them together. And I'm teaching you at every stage. And really, the benefit of that is that you're not learning about birth when you're only 4 months pregnant. We're talking about what's happening in your body right now at 4 months pregnant. What can you expect when you have round ligament pain? Well, we're on it. You've learned about it before it even happens. And it takes away a lot of that stress and a lot of the unknown. It also helps me to guide couples to find the right care where they are, because I know what they're looking for based on who they are and where they are. And very often, because I have a network of birth workers and doulas around the world,
Oh,
I
nice.
can hook them into that network or guide them to find someone if they're looking for somebody on the ground. But even when they find somebody on the ground, we still continue to work together. In fact, it's so funny because one of my clients was in Botswana until recently, and then because of COVID, her husband was transferred back to Australia. And we had a call last week and I said, well, you're probably, going to stop working with me now because you're back in Australia. You found a care provider, you've got 2 obstetricians and 2 midwives and a doula. And she said, no, 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 absolutely not. So it's beautiful to know that, we've developed such a nice, lovely relationship throughout the pregnancy. And it's great because I get to see babies being born. I assist with the breastfeeding. So generally, I would continue working with my couples until baby's at least 6 weeks old, and then carry on celebrating birthdays for the next 18 or 20 years.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's so nice. And I can just repeat what I said before. I think it's priceless to have someone by your side through all of this, and yes, can definitely make the whole journey a lot calmer and nicer and less lonely.
Absolutely. Thank
Excellent.
you
So
so much.
I'm gonna link all of your website and your resources. I'm gonna link that in the session notes. And yes, I thank you again for coming on here and sharing everything that you know with us.
Thank
Thank you.
you so much. And what I'll do is I will send you that download or a link to get the download. And I can also create a coupon code for you for anybody who wants to possibly get one
Excellent.
of my codes,
Lovely.
courses or something.
Yes, excellent. That's lovely. So, guys, please check that out. And yes, let us know, in comments on social media, what you thought of this episode. If you have any feedback, what was your key takeaway? And definitely for anything further, you can get in touch with Karen directly. So thank you all for listening, and I'll be back with you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to share this episode with your expat besties and show me some love in the reviews. Want more juicy content designed for expat wives? Then head over to my website, www.camillaquintana.com, or follow me on Instagram and Facebook at coach.camillaquintana.